Hi, I'm Natia Manaya from the Trans Leadership Cohort out of UTOPIA Washington. Did you know that according to the 2020 census, there are over 1.6 million Pacific Islanders living in the United States? Just imagine what kind of voting power we would have if we all participated in federal, local, and state elections. I'm here to discuss today voters registration. As a trans woman of color, voting is one of the best ways to let your voice be heard. You want to know the best way to carry out your civic duty? Click the link below to register to vote or to update your voting registration profile. Youth members aged 16 and 17 can also pre-register to vote. When they turn 18, they will automatically receive their first ballot. So you're probably wondering why I'm telling you all of this. The Washington State general election is fast approaching and is set to take place on Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021. This is a real big chance for us to make an impact on our local government. Following registration, you will need to keep a watchful eye on your mailbox for a voter's pamphlet, which will include a list of candidates and races included in this year's election cycle. And most importantly, your ballot, which will be scheduled to arrive shortly thereafter. Lastly, make your vote count by either mailing it back to the election office or delivering the ballot to the nearby drop box. Just don't forget to sign the back of the ballot. If transportation presents a barrier for you, UTOPIA Washington is willing to provide transportation on election day if you need us to help you vote or simply send in your ballot. We at UTOPIA Washington want to encourage you guys to let your voting power be known in this important election. For more information, feel free to visit us on our website, follow us on social media, and subscribe to our monthly newsletter. Well, thank you guys for having me. Again, I'm Natia Manaya with UTOPIA Washington. Make sure you guys go out and vote this upcoming election. Bye.
Talofa lava and welcome to our Kent Mayoral Candidate Talanoa. My name is Tweety Fatuesi. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Civic Engagement Program Manager with UTOPIA Washington.
And my name is Suyong Yoon. I use they, them pronouns, and I also serve as a Civic Engagement Program Manager here at UTOPIA Washington. So UTOPIA Washington is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And the mission of our Civic Engagement Program is to engage our community and also make sure that queer and trans Pacific Islanders are represented at every level of government.
Today, we are proud to present an opportunity for our communities of color to really engage in a meaningful conversation which revolves and includes candidates who are in the running for mayor of Kent City. As an organization, we continue to center the voices of First Nations and Indigenous people of the land by acknowledging that we are mere guests to Turtle Island. We honor their heritage, their stewardship, but most of all, we honor their ability to cultivate these lands that we occupy as settlers. We celebrate their existence today and for generations to come, and we would like to encourage you to visit native land and to see what land you currently occupy. You can also go one step further by paying real rent, and you can do so by visiting realrentduwamish.org. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for a special Talanoa-style interview with UTOPIA Washington. Tala means story, and Noa means to tie or bind. Through Talanoa, we connect our stories and bring together communities for meaningful conversations. Talanoa aims to provide a cultural space to talk about current critical topics in our communities. Unique from a traditional candidate forum, a Talanoa will allow us to hear your thoughts on critical issues that affect our communities through a casual style interview. To kick us off, Please introduce yourself. Feel free to include your name, pronouns, and other details. Then, could you tell us about your professional history and why you are choosing to run for this position as Mayor of Kent?
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation for this conversation. And thank you to Utopia for all of the work you're doing. Very proud that you call Kent home. So grateful for that. So my name is Dana Ralph, pronouns she, her, and I am running, well, I'm currently the mayor for the city of Kent, and I'm running for re-election coming up in November. I am a lifelong Kent resident, actually fourth generation here in the city of Kent. So I'm a proud Kent Meridian High School grad. Started my small business here 25 years ago. I'm also the mom of two wonderful boys. They're 21 and 25, and just have been dedicated to this community my entire life. So I started out in community activities through things like PTA and just your normal, like, this is how you get involved because your kids are a part of things, and really enjoyed the civic engagement. When my boys were small, Kent was changing a lot. We were growing very rapidly. And we're not a little town anymore. We're a big city. And I saw that happening, and there were some things that were frustrating to me. And through a series of conversations, the mayor at the time invited me to join what's called the Land Use and Planning Board. And that's a community board that makes recommendations to the city council around things like zoning and growth, and where do you put commercial areas and where do we build multifamily versus single family homes and that kind of thing. I did not have any background in that, so I said no, and he asked me a couple more times, and I finally said, okay, you know what, I can do this. I can't complain about things if I don't offer up solutions and am not engaged in the process. So I served on the Land Use and Planning Board, eventually becoming chair of that group for about 8 years. I also at the time was appointed to the Arts Commission, because one of my passions is making sure that our community has access to art, both visual and performing. I think it's a huge part of all of our lives. Music and art and expression, it's how we learn about each other. It's how we stretch ourselves and grow. So served on that board as well. And I thought, you know what, I'm loving working with and for my community. And so I decided to run for city council, and I worked really hard and I lost. And it was okay. Probably one of the best things that could have happened, because the gentleman that I ran against that won that race reached out to me right away and said, you know what, I want to see you on the city council and I want to work with you. And I'm very proud of that, because through that campaign, we stayed positive, we became friends. And to me, that's how politics should be, right? It does not have to be mean and nasty, and it doesn't have to be people not liking each other. So 2 years later, I ran for city council and I won. Served on our city council for 6 years, 2 years as the city council president. And then our former mayor, Mayor Cook, was announced that she was retiring. And I thought, you know what, here's my chance to be able to serve my community and work in this role on a full-time basis. I'd done all of the groundwork. I'd learned about the city and the budget and all of those things through my work on council, and I ran for mayor, and that was 4 years ago. So there is my story about how I got here, and looking forward to serving our community for another 4 years.
Thank you. Dawn, same question.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you all for having me. My name is Dawn Bennett. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Executive Director of African American Leadership Forum. The first thing that I want to say is the reason why I ran for mayor is because I have a vast experience in leadership. I've been a supervisor for more than 30 years, which means I've led for more than 30 years. So as the Executive Director of African American Leadership Forum, we advocate for communities in the African diaspora. So along the whole spectrum, we have done advocacy in Olympia on mainly education, but all the other isms that hit us, we've been advocating for that because there was just a need, and so we decided to do it. I am the co-founder of Multicultural Education Rights Alliance because I'm an education advocate. I used to be the liaison for African Americans with the Seattle Public School District. And I did a lot of great work with the African American community. And while I was doing that work with the African American communities, other communities from the ELL community started asking me if I could help them and advocate for them, because I went in with there were no rules. I got to say whatever I wanted to say because it was on behalf of our children. And so then I started doing that for other children, folks who didn't speak English, because it was in the arena of special ed. And so we all know that the ELL community has been forced into special ed and don't need to be, right? African American kids have been forced into the special ed, don't need to be there. So we advocated there. And so as I advocated for African Americans, I then started advocating for other cultures. And then I started my company, Multicultural Education Rights Alliance. I also started my whole career as a late night specialist, where we worked with the wannabe, or the people that they like to call gangs. They were not gangs. They were just folks who didn't have the same opportunity as others. So I worked 20 years in doing that work on the streets, working with young people who just wanted to hit the streets and have some fun some kind of way. They got some guns and they were then called gangs. So I worked with them for a long time. I was the supervisor, making sure that they had other things to do other than just run out in the streets and do all the madness that the television was telling them to do. There's a lot more that I've been doing, but I just hit those top three. But there's a lot of crossover in my work. I do a lot of cultural work all the time because it was in the 80s and the 90s that work was missing. So I just decided to do it in any space that would hire me. I also worked for the Orion Center, where I worked with young people that were on the streets. Trafficking and all that sort of thing was happening to them. I put myself right in the middle of that and ended up working with those who were homeless teens, houseless teens who didn't have access to anything. So I started working for the Orion Center.
Thank you. We'd love to give a little background on our organization, UTOPIA Washington, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Since 2009, UTOPIA has worked with queer and trans Pacific Islanders, affectionately abbreviated as Cutie Pie, to create a safe, welcoming, supportive, and vibrant space for members of our community to address basic needs, build pathways for new expanded careers and life opportunities, and foster a sense of common purpose. UTOPIA is led and founded by women of color identifying as transgender and or fa'afafine. Fa'afafine is a cultural gender identity native to Samoa, translated as in the manner of a woman. Our cultural identity plays an integral role in the way we care for and fight for the liberation of queer and trans people of color. Since its inception, UTOPIA has worked to build power and help our community members access resources, employment, stable housing, higher education, culturally competent healthcare, and more. These community members face hardships in securing employment due to race and gender-based discrimination, and were often pushed into sex work, low-paying hard labor jobs, and contracted out-of-state jobs where their rights as workers were violated with limited access to healthcare.
So this brings us to our first set of employment-related questions. According to the National Center of Transgender Equality, more than 1 in 4 transgender people have lost a job due to bias, and more than 3/4 have experienced some form of workplace discrimination. Refusal to hire, privacy violations, harassment, and even physical and sexual violence on the job are common occurrences. And they are experienced at even higher rates by transgender people of color. Many people report changing jobs to avoid discrimination. Extreme levels of unemployment and poverty lead 1 in 8 to become involved in underground economies, such as sex and drug work, in order to survive. The City of Seattle Department of Neighborhoods has a community liaison program that helps people of color get resources and jobs. Can Kent do anything similar? And how will you as mayor keep the queer and trans Black Indigenous communities of color aware of opportunities and resources so that we are not left out of the hiring pool?
So that was a really long question. You guys have really long questions packed. There's a lot packed in there. So I'm going to try to unpack a little bit of it. First of all, I think that people of color, transgender people, all of the othering, all of that is nonsense. I think people are people. And so there shouldn't have to be a special way to engage folks into our processes. We just have a problem of trying to keep things white cis males. And so as a queer mayor myself, I would just do it. Like it just, all of this stuff just comes natural to me, right? Folks will show up with skill and I will choose that person with the skill, right? Doesn't matter if they're transgender, straight or not. We have to stop all of this othering. And as mayor, I would bring that into our office. In Kent, I can't find our LGBTQ community. It's like they're hiding out. Like our leadership doesn't even want to talk about it. I will talk about it because that is me, right? That is my family. That is that's how love happens around me, right? So that means if that's how love happens around me, that's how love happens in all of the processes in Kent, that everyone is included. And there doesn't have to be this sort of special way to include folks. So my answer with that is that I would treat everyone equally and I would look for the skill in folks. Of course, I would look to our data in discrimination in the city of Kent, which include a lot of groups, specifically the transgender groups. Did I answer that fully?
Thank you for that. Thank you for that response.
Thank you. Mayor Ralph, same question.
Okay, thank you for this question. I think it's really important to talk about the work that the City of Kent is already doing. And at the same time, I'm going to acknowledge right up front that there's more work to be done. So please don't take my my answers of here's what we're doing as I see that as the end of the conversation. It's just really the beginning. So last year, I created a role at the City of Kent, Race and Equity Manager. Uriel Varela is our Race and Equity Manager in the City of Kent. And he has been working now for the last year with our queer and trans community, BIPOC community, to ensure that we're meeting their needs. I know that he's spent time meeting with UTOPIA as well as our Human Services Department and really helping us learn how we can better serve our community. I authorized the GARE program in our city to train our city employees so that they're developing a collective knowledge and historical perspective as they serve everyone in the city of Kent, including our queer and trans community and our BIPOC communities as well. We've put the city through all of our employees a required race and equity training that was conducted by Erin Jones. She's a national speaker that's located right here in Western Washington and kicked off that training last year. Also doing a lot of work in our police department. For many years, our police department has had a commander work as a community liaison. So at the commander level, we had a community liaison to our LGBTQ IA plus community. That's something we've been doing for a long time, making sure that that commander is touching base with the community, not only when tragedy happens. So I think back to the Pulse nightclub shooting in Florida, right? That commander was there reaching out, making sure that our community felt safe and knowing that the police department was a resource for them. Most recently, I created a race and equity commander position, and that's Commander Bobby Hollis. I know that he's also been meeting with UTOPIA here even just recently and working to grow that relationship, right? So understanding, making an opportunity to understand what the needs are in the community. Additionally, we are in the process through Commander Hollis's work of setting up a safe place program in Kent so that our businesses are trained in becoming places where if someone is a victim of hate crime, and we know that that happens more often in our queer and trans and BIPOC communities than it does in most any other community. So making sure there's a safe place for folks to go where they know that they can access resources and report those crimes. If we don't all take that very seriously, we are never going to make the progress we need to make. We are doing a lot of work in our hiring process at the City of Kent to make sure that we're removing barriers that were set there intentionally or unintentionally to prevent people from all backgrounds applying and working at the city, just really wanting to create an environment where everyone feels welcome. We've got a race and equity speaker series that goes on with our employees on a monthly basis, a committee that's set up as well as for community members. So like I said, doing a lot of work. Still, there's a lot of work to be done, but I feel like we're on the right path. And I honestly would put the effort that Kent is putting in up against any city in the region, and am also open to feedback on where we can be doing more.
Thank you. The next question involves safety for QT5 communities. Transgender people are too frequently targeted for violence and abuse because of their gender identity or presentation. Routinely, however, that violence and abuse comes from the very authorities entrusted with their safety. Police frequently harass and profile transgender people of color, sowing distrust among the very communities they have sworn to serve. According to the 2015 U.S. Transgender Survey, a majority, 57% of transgender people are afraid to go to the police when they need it. What will you do as mayor to protect queer and trans people of color in Kent, including preventing racial profiling and the abuse of law enforcement? When law enforcement abuses power, how will you keep them accountable?
Okay, I definitely appreciate that question. And same thing applies to the answers here, right? There is a lot of work that we're doing, multiple layers, and it doesn't mean that it's the end. It means it's the beginning of the work. So I want to start out by ensuring you that the Kent Police Department only hires exceptional officers. They have to have a heart to serve their community. That is the first and foremost. There's something that we talk about a lot, that you can't teach heart, right? You can teach rules and laws and codes and all of those things, but you can't train someone's heart. If they don't have that desire to serve, they're not someone that the Kent Police Department is looking to hire. We're doing extensive work in recruiting and retaining diverse candidates. And that includes pre-employment screenings, investigations, again, more so than most any department around. It's not just picking up the phone and doing a background check. It's talking to people that these recruits have worked for, whether they're former or previous law enforcement experience or they're coming from other jobs. We also invest heavily in training. It's something that I believe in and something that our chief believes in strongly. We were one of the first departments in the nation to do implicit bias training and just completed another round of that training in 2020. We have extensive race and equity training in our department. We hire national speakers and embrace all of the most cutting edge education opportunities for our officers. So we've got the ABLE training, which is the active bystander for law enforcement. It's a nationally recognized policy developed by Georgetown Law that all of our officers go through. I think I mentioned Dwayne Bryant. He's a national speaker that has been working with our police department around community relationships and community building, crisis intervention training, de-escalation training, reality-based scenario training. All of those things go into making sure that our officers have all of the tools they need. And then we're continually engaging in community relationship building. So a couple of things under that. We've established the Kent Police Department Race and Equity Advisory Board, and their mission is to provide direct advice to the chief regarding race and equity in our community. So we want to learn from our community on what they need, and we need that feedback, right? One of the things I presented to council in my budget last week was investment in data collection and analysis so that we could see if there is bias in our policing. We need the data to prove one direction or the other. And we contracted with Seattle University to get some baseline studies done, and then we'll be investing in a person to do ongoing data analysis. One of the things I'm extremely extremely proud of, is our body camera program. When I first became mayor, I had committed that we would have body worn cameras, because we need to be able to see that interaction, right? It protects our community and it protects the officers. We were one of the first cities around to do that. Now with police reform, you're seeing a lot of cities scrambling to get a body worn camera program up. It's something we've been doing since 2018. And we use those when a complaint comes in, we can pull that body camera footage and we can take a look at it, because we take those complaints very, very seriously. We use the videos to train our officers, reinforcing what we want them to do, also pointing out what they should not be doing. So we take that footage very seriously. We've also directed the update of all of our use of force policies, created new policies around duty to intervene. So if an officer is a bystander and sees something inappropriate, they're required to intervene. We've implemented post-arrest care policies, so we don't see things that we've seen horrifically around the country happening here in Kent. I also support the chief in discipline, right? That's something that's an important part of this. So we can do all of these things, but if there is an officer that's committed misconduct, we have fired officers since I become mayor, and that's not something that was happening before. Obviously, we want to make sure we're doing all the upfront work, but when we find out that they're not behaving appropriately, that they're not supporting our community and serving, then those are not folks that we want representing the city of Kent. So whole long list of things we're doing to make sure that our officers are serving our community and have the training they need to do that in an appropriate way. And my hope is that instills faith and trust from our community in our police department, right? We have to walk the talk, and we have to show that our actions support the work that quite frankly needs to be done.
Thank you. Dawn, same question.
So, as a queer person myself, for years I was followed by the Kent police up and down the hill, because my job had me coming home late at night. So I was followed all the time. And I was always thought, who do I go to? What do I do about this, right? There was always this fear that if I got out of the car, something would happen to me, because I don't look like your normal lady, right? I had baggy clothes on, short hair, hat to the side, right? So I didn't want to have that fear. So I'm running for mayor now, 20 years forward, so we can do the work to stop that. There's a lot of diversity work that the police department has to do, which includes transgender, the LGBTQ community. Again, I have to tell you that I don't know where the community is in Kent. It's like they've been scared back in their houses. I'm not one that will be fearful and scared into the house, but first I have to meet them all, right? Which is why I'm like, there's utopia here. I know we know what we need to do here in Kent. There's a lot of work that needs to be done here in Kent when it comes to the LGBTQ community. We don't have a parade. We don't have a picnic that they have in Seattle. You know, our leadership was scared about Dawn does a lot of stuff in Seattle. Yes, I do. Because all of the stuff that happens for us, Seattle has started that stuff, right? We need a parade. We need to have our big picnic. We need folks to know that we're here and we're safe people and we're not going to tear up the thing just because we're LGBTQ. So Kent, being a leader in Kent that's LGBTQIA myself, I would always teach folks that we are safe. Just like I'm always teaching folks as a Black woman, I am safe. You're not going to come to me and things happen to you. So trying to have some sort of conversation with our whole city about, please don't be afraid of us. Stop the othering. So it's just a norm. It's a normal way of living, and we have to communicate to Kent that it is. We have to have a department that works on that. So our human services department should work on some of the issues that come up in the LGBTQIA community. There also should be a liaison, because I will have a liaison because I will have some outreach workers say, listen, let's go find our community and let's show them that they're welcome. We're welcome. Everybody's welcome.
Thank you. Another related question on trans safety follows. Bathroom bills perpetuate violence against trans and gender nonconforming individuals. According to the most recent National Transgender Discrimination Survey report, a whopping 63% of respondents, quotes, had experienced a serious act of discrimination, quote, in their lifetime. Roughly 70% of trans people have reported being denied entrance, assaulted, or harassed while trying to use a restroom, according to a 2013 Williams Institute report. How will you ensure more inclusive restroom access for trans and gender diverse people throughout the city of Kent?
So that question has a lot to do with, how we've been operating as a whole, blocking access to those who are not the majority, right? This is another form of power, blocking access to a bathroom, right? Through othering, right? You can't even go to the bathroom correctly. So, these numbers are just, you can just lay that over what we do as a civilization when it comes to discrimination. Blocking folks from places, blocking folks from jobs, blocking folks from, these studies tell us a lot about what we've been doing here by just giving access to a chosen few and keeping others out. This bathroom is just another example. This bathroom access, right? You can't even go to the bathroom without getting, you can't come in because you don't look like the normal folks. That kind of behavior has to stop, right? It happens to all of us that don't look like the majority, don't act like the majority, but in ways, we are the majority. And so I would lead in that way. Everything has to be inclusive. It's just the way that I live, and it's the way that our city should be.
Thank you. Mayor Ralph, same question.
So I will tell you, when I read this question, that statistic of 70% was heartbreaking to me. I'll be honest, I did not realize it was that high, and not acceptable at all. So I can tell you the things that we are doing at the city. When we opened the YMCA up on East Hill, we worked with them to have a more inclusive bathroom policy. So options and choices. So one of the things that I'm meeting with our Public Works and Facilities Department on how do we provide single stall bathrooms for people so they've got a choice, right? Then it eliminates that conflict point. We want to take that out. Access to the restroom, that seems to be a pretty basic human right. It's something we all need to do. And I am committed to finding ways as we're building new city facilities and updating our existing facilities that we provide that access in a safe way.
Thank you. Our next question is about a population that makes up the heart of Kent, and certainly includes cutie pies. The U.S. Census Bureau reported that in 2015 to 2019, 31.8% of Kent residents are foreign-born. That makes almost a third of the Kent population. We know that immigrants make up a large part of the culture and community of the city. A tremendous 140 languages are spoken in the Kent School District. What plans, resources, and infrastructure would you enact to help new immigrants thrive here, including robust language access?
All right. Thank you for this question. I am smiling because this is one of the things I am so proud of in the city of Kent. We are the 8th most diverse city in the entire country. If you stop and let that sink in, that is pretty incredible, and something we need to be proud of, because that means also that overall we're a welcoming community. Again, places that we need to work, continued improvement, but the fact that people from all over the world call Kent home is something that I'm extremely proud of, and I think that as a community we should all be very, very proud of. again, touched a little bit on this. So ways that we can help our immigrant and refugee populations thrive in Kent, working on our hiring practices, because I want to make sure that we're not putting barriers up for hiring at the city, and setting an example for all of our private employers, right? I feel like the city has a responsibility to do things well, so that our private employers can use that as an example. In my budget this year, budget proposal to City Council, I included money for translation services. We started working about a year ago with all of our departments to identify the primarily the most used documents that we have in each department, and we're working on getting them translated. And it's not just a matter of translating them going out. I need to assure that we have the response back. It doesn't do us any good if we put a document in Spanish and then have no one on the other end to read those responses, right? So wanting to make sure that we've got a complete program, using tools like Google Translate for our website, YouTube does automatic translation, those kinds of things, making sure that the work is being done there. If you look at all of our city mailers over the last year, we've been adding QR codes to them so that you can scan it and it will allow for translation of documents. And that, again, something that I'm very, very proud of. We established our Cultural Communities Board. I was on city council, so it has to be 6 years ago. And the whole goal behind that was to have representatives from our diverse communities working with the city and bringing not only the needs that their individual communities have, but also working to push that information back out into our communities, right? Sort of that trusted voice that people can look to and rely on. We've got our Race and Equity Board in the police department. Something I'm very proud of, a new program we have in our police department. It's called the Community Immersion Program for Law Enforcement, so CLIP. And basically what this program does, we're the first police department in the nation to have this, and we're piloting it with Representative Tina Orwell, and the University of Washington is doing all of our data collection, but it takes all of our new hires, our new officers, and immerses them in the community for 2 to 4 months prior to even going to the academy. So we offer them the position. We're partnering with community-based organizations, and they're there volunteering. And meeting our community, understanding the needs of our diverse community. The first officer, Officer Kumar, was assigned to World Relief, and he was assigned right at the beginning of the crisis in Afghanistan. So the timing could not have been better. He's picking people up from the airport, helping them move into their apartments, taking them to appointments. No better way to learn firsthand what our community needs than being there, doing the heavy lifting, literally, figuratively. And also establishing for those newest residents that the city cares about them and our police department cares about them. So I'm really, really proud of that partnership. And then finally, we have developed over time strong relationships, like I said, with organizations, World Relief, Living Well Kent, Youth Policy Council. We continue to fund our community-based organizations that provide culturally appropriate resources through our CDBG grants, including UTOPIA. We funded some housing through Multi-Service Center some housing dollars during the pandemic. Open Doors for Multicultural Families, Mother Africa, just really working on developing relationships in our very, very diverse community.
Thank you. Dawn, same question.
Well, I listened to the mayor's binary budget, and what I would do is reallocate that budget. We have to have an office of refugee, immigrant, and refugee. We must have that, because there's too many folks from the community that need that. We have to reallocate the budget so it is, fair to everyone. And we must have that office to ensure that we're doing that work and doing the work right. I've seen that office work in Seattle, and I believe that we can do that work here in Kent. Here in Kent, we have to be more intentional with the way race has come to our city. We have to be intentional about the work that we must do to ensure that everyone is getting access to our city and the tools that we have. So I 100% believe that we need an office of immigration and refugee and immigrants, something to that effect.
Thank you. Our final question involves one of our key programs here at Utopia. One of Utopia's primary programs is SWAY, the Sex Workers Empowerment Initiative. SWAY focuses on the urgent needs of queer and trans Black, Indigenous, and people of color whose safety and well-being are jeopardized by their work in the sex industry due to criminalization, stigma, and the structural marginalization of sex workers. Utopia Washington has witnessed and experienced the harm of criminalizing sex work over the years, more so for trans women of color, especially for Black trans women. Statistics on trans women being harmed or murdered are disproportionately high, while government agencies aren't providing the safety and protection for them due to criminalization. Utopia firmly believes in the decriminalization of sex work and that sex work is work. Utopia also believes that it is critical for governments and nonprofits to dissect the conflation of human trafficking, in which there is a perpetrator and a victim, from sex work in which both adults consent to the service. If elected, what will you do to ensure the safety, legitimacy, and autonomy of sex workers in Kent and Washington state?
So the safety, legitimacy, and autonomy of sex workers is important. Like I said, we have to reallocate our budget to make sure that we have the workers on the streets and in communities where it's needed. When I say workers, when I used to do my work, it was really important that there were workers on the streets of Seattle that were witnesses, right? Folks have to see what's happening, because what's done in the dark during the daytime, folks can say anything, right? The perpetrator could say anything. So we need workers out on the street. I need to reallocate our budget so there are workers on the street, outreach workers who are talking to folks who are being victimized, really know the truth, right? I used to work until about 4:00 in the morning when I worked with these young people that were getting in trouble, because I wanted to see for myself what was actually happening. And then during the day, I could come up with solutions of how to help the youth that we were helping. I would absolutely do that work in the city of Kent. And we have to reallocate the budget because there's no money in the budget that does that work. So it's all about resources. It's all about having folks on the ground to see what the work actually is so that we can start doing the work. I think that the numbers speak for themselves. I think that I would do that work because this victimization touched my family, right? And I take it personal that a lot of work has not been done to help those who are most victimized on these streets, on our streets. And so the perpetrator has to be held accountable, and folks who want to be sex workers, to legalize that and decriminalize that, we have to do more fighting. We're not there yet, right? We have to, there's something that has to be built in order to do that work. We are so not there yet. We're still in, thank you. We're still in the fighting phase. We're still fighting to have things done right. If we're still in the if we're still in the fighting phase, no one is going to let us decriminalize anything, right? We're still fighting, right? So there are some things that we need to do to build access to getting legislation passed so that then we can decriminalize things. Is that making sense? So just like in the Black community, African American specific, there's some things that we want and we need. We've had hundreds of years of still fighting, so folks cannot give us access to what we need to carry on. It's the same thing in this arena.
Thank you. Mayor Ralph, same question.
So I'm going to be honest, this was a hard question for me. I have long been a proponent of work around human trafficking and getting victims out of that horrific life. So my background is focused on the human trafficking aspect. And I do not support legalizing the human trafficking side. So I struggle a little bit there. I have seen the impact that has predominantly on our juveniles who are forced into providing sex for profit, and that the damage that is done there. But I also do not support the prosecuting of the victims of human trafficking, right? Our police department does not arrest for that. That is not something that I support, nor have we done for many, many years. I've personally worked with our legislature around things like the Safe Harbors Act to decriminalize human trafficking victims, especially those under 18, and providing resources. And I think this goes to access to resources, because the violence against trans women of color that are in the sex industry is not acceptable in our community, and they need to know that there are resources out there. Our police department, we use drug forfeiture money to help victims and make sure that they have access to resources and opportunities for stable housing and employment and all of those kinds of things. We continue to be a leader in that area in the city of Kent, and I'll continue to support the work that's being done around human trafficking. I did look at the Utopia website, and I will tell you, I'm also very, very supportive of the work that you are doing around testing, providing medical services, providing resources, education, all of those things. I think that that is a key component in keeping people safe and making sure that they have resources that they need. At the beginning, you talked a little bit about access to healthcare, and I know this is a little off script, but I want to make sure that I get this in there. Before I became mayor, my business that I started, I have a medical billing service. So I work on the doctor side, but one of the things I've been really passionate about is working with people to make sure they have the ability to access healthcare, that the cost and insurance didn't prevent them from receiving services. So the work that you all are doing around healthcare is something that I've been working with my providers that I work with on making sure that they have help people that don't traditionally have access to healthcare in that field. And I think that it's something that's really important work, and I'm grateful that you all are doing.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us in our Talanoa today. Do you have any final closing words?
I want to say thank you to Utopia for being actively engaged in our community and making sure that there's a voice for our queer, trans people of color. It's not something that was in Kent before 2009, at least not out in the front. And I am grateful for that. I love that you are doing this work, taking care of our community, and actively engaged in city government. That is important, and that's how we make change. That's how we take care of each other and support each other. And so again, I just want to say thank you for the willingness to create honest and genuine connection and advocating for change.
Thank you. Dawn, you as well?
Yes, I am so proud to be here with my folks, with my family, right? I do ask for your endorsement. I would really love to have your sole endorsement, but if I don't get that, I would really love to have a dual endorsement. I would really like to be the mayor of this city. So one, I could tell all the LGBTQIA folks that it's safe to come out. Come out. Let's celebrate. Those are my closing words.
Thank you so much. And to our audience, please remember to register to vote today and then vote in the general election, which is taking place on Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021. To get more involved with our civic engagement programs, we invite you to join us in our phone banking activity and our text banking activity that is coming up real soon. We'd like to encourage you to make your voice heard in this very important election. And to our candidates, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us, and good luck to you both. Fa'afetai te le lava, maia manuia.